we'll go ahead and get started and I'll introduce myself. I'm Kim Hales. I am the Director of Client Services here at Sukup Strategic Solutions. I've been here in this role for just over 3 months, but I have almost 20 years of experience in nonprofit organizations, starting out kind of as an event planner and working through a lot of different sectors, including higher education, the arts, and community engagement. And I have extensive years of grant writing experience and everything through federal grants. So I really hope that the presentation today is helpful for everyone. There is a question tab where you can write any questions. I'll have time for questions at the very end, but if anyone's like me and you forget what that question is, as soon as you comes into your head, just type it in the chat. Sorry, not in the chat, in the question section, and I will get to it as I can or go through all of those at the end. You can also use the chat for conversations during any of this. So again, welcome, and we can go ahead and get started. So obviously this is the Unlocking Grant Success webinar. If you're here for something else, I hope you'll stay. But we're going to go ahead and get started. So really the learning objectives today is for you to understand grant readiness and what that means for your organization, how you can determine if you're ready to apply for grants, for what types of grants you're ready to apply for, what you would need to kind of move to the next level. Really looking at how you build a foundation to be successful in your grant writing and in obtaining those grants, and also how to really build up a calendar for you to do throughout the year. And so by the end of this, hopefully you'll have at least some indication of how to move forward with all of these things. So when we talk about grant funding, we're talking about funding from several different sources. So these are really kind of the three main areas of grant sources. So private foundations is really where the bulk of probably many of you are working from and looking for funding from. They include corporate foundations and family foundations. When you look at corporate granting, many, especially the really, really large corporations, have foundation arms where they are making those gifts out of the foundation. They also have, for many of you who have been working in this sector for a long time, will understand that sponsorship and sort of marketing comes out of a separate bucket. I like to think of, those two. If you have to write a formal application and you have reporting requirements, those are generally coming out of that foundation grant funding. They can't have any benefit to that. Most of those, again, are a separate foundation with all of the legalities of making gifts. The marketing support can sometimes come out of a different area and a different pool of money where they have the ability to have, sponsorship benefits and packages and tables and all of that. So when we're talking about grants, we're really looking at that corporate foundation. And then, family foundations and other private foundations, your Rockefeller Foundation, which again, was started as a family foundation, and many different locations and states and cities have a plethora of those family foundations. Your research can include looking through Candid or Instrumental. There are some really great research tools for those things. Some of them are free, some of them cost money, depending on where you're at in your organization's grant journey, whether or not that's something that you can afford to do. But the two, Candid and Instrumental, are really great at giving you a lot of information. You can also find that information in the 990s for those organizations, which are publicly available. Public charities, we look at that. You're talking about United Way, community foundations, Catholic charities. For those of you, and someone here is in Louisville, Kentucky, we have the Fund for the Arts, which, is a collective. They raise money from the community and then distribute that in grants, which is, similar to what a community foundation does, United Way. There are lots of organizations like that in every city as well. And then government agencies. And I would say these go from probably the more the easier grants to write to the most difficult. And if anyone has written a federal grant, there are a lot of stipulations that go along with that, and they're probably some of the most difficult ones to obtain. They also can be some of the most lucrative and highest dollar level grants that you can get as well. And again, feel free to type in questions as I'm going through this, and I will try to answer them, right? So your grant success is really based on a few things: your readiness and commitment. And we're going to get through what in a few minutes about what that readiness looks like and kind of where you are. Your alignment with the funder's priorities. You and your organization is not going to be a great fit for every funder, and you've really got to look at that, what they're saying they are looking for. And yes, sometimes can you fit in with a part of it and not all of it? And will you get funding? Yes. But if, you know, the funding organization is really looking at, you know, social justice and equity, and you are a animal rescue nonprofit, they're probably not going to be a good fit, and the time that you're going to take to do that is not worth it. Your ability to tell your nonprofit story, to tell that cohesively and well and with you know, some great impact. And then the willingness to build relationships. And I think this is one of the most common maybe misconceptions out there, is that you just have to send these grants in blind, that these foundations are not willing to have conversations with you, and you're not able to build those relationships. And that is really not true. I mean, yes, are there going to be some that don't have the time to talk to everyone who reaches out to them? But for the most part, many of these foundations, they want it to be a beneficial relationship for both you and them. And so they want to seek nonprofits that fit within their priorities, but they also want to have those conversations to make sure that everyone's on the right track. So don't be afraid to reach out and find a program officer at these foundations or corporations that can help you. All right, so the key components of a grant-ready organization: clear mission and objectives. I think this is probably the key, and it really does sound like something everyone should have, but not everybody does. And really being able to articulate that clearly is really, really important. Financial stability. Organizations are looking, they're making an investment, and they want to know that you have the financial stability to perform in the way that that grant has been written, and the sustainability for that. They want to see strong leadership and governance and effective program design and evaluation. So let's go through. Mission and vision. How many organizations out here have both a mission and a vision statement? Write that in the chat if you have both. And if you know what the difference is between them. So, right, the mission is why you're doing what you do. It should be clear, it should be concise, you should be able to recite it in, you know, one sentence in a few seconds. The vision statement is more of your long-term aspirations, right? So one of the organizations that I have just recently worked with has a really great, I think, mission and then vision. So their mission is to provide services to create equity in the community, and their vision is to create a sustainable community where everyone has access to be successful. And so when you look at the difference between those two, it's really like why and what they're doing, and then what you want to see long-term vision. But it looks like everybody has those, so that's great. That is not always the case with everyone, so that's fantastic. All right, financial stability. This is the one that I think, you know, really, I shouldn't say trips up some people, but I think when you are looking for grant funding and new to grant funding, this is something that especially brand new nonprofits can struggle with. Having all of these things a balance sheet, an income statement, audited financial statements are sometimes not what everyone has. And now there are plenty of nonprofits, depending on your revenue and expenses, that you are not required to have audited financials. But there are some funders who won't require them, but there are a lot who will. And so having those is really important. Being able to show that sustainability to a funder is incredibly important. Organizational budgets and program and project budgets are really integral and key. Everyone is going to ask for those. Having your budgets be clear and concise, the project budget especially, and really indicating what part, and this is, everybody's, every grant writer and nonprofit fundraising professionals, worst nightmare is talking about the difference between program and overhead. We all understand that in order to accomplish what we want to accomplish, there is overhead. And I think there is a shift a little bit from some funders to understand that a little bit more. But for the majority, we are still looking at people who want to see that, program percentage being incredibly high. And so when you're looking at your project budget, making sure that that really aligns with what you're talking about and what you want to do is incredibly important. Leadership and governance. So most funders are going to ask a lot of questions on this, including some, if not all of these topics. Some will ask for resumes and bios of key staff members, especially a program director or someone who's going to be in charge of the program that you're asking for funding for. Most will ask for your board diversity and your board giving percentage. And so those are things, having readily on hand, and having, a board giving policy is really important. For many funders, they want to know, the board is the group closest to you in your organization. If you're not getting close to 100% participation from those closest to you, it's difficult for a funder to, want to make that investment. So really looking at where your board is and their giving capacity and percentage is important there. If you have a strategic plan, conflict of interest policies, really everything in all of this is kind of their due diligence at making sure you're not only financially viable, but have all of the policies and procedures in place to be, moving forward in the right way. If you have partnerships, which is, we're seeing a lot of organizations want to see that. They want to fund programs where you are utilizing many community resources and where people are coming together. And so if you have partnership agreements or memorandums of understanding from other organizations about the work that you're doing, those are also really helpful when you're looking at having that be a part of that application. All right, so program design and evaluation. And I think, we talk about this being alignment with the funder's priorities. So when we talked earlier about really doing the research about what they want to fund, my suggestion is to read the application and then read it again and read it again. The questions that they're asking in those applications can give you a really clear indication, if you kind of read them closely, about what they're looking for. And then you can articulate your mission and program in the way to really match what they're looking for. Having clear goals and objectives, right? Smart, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound. When you put those SMART goals in there, they're really going to see that you have thought this out and have a roadmap to really implement the program, to have effective outcomes, to do the work that you have said you are going to do to solve the problem that you want to solve. Having evidence-based practices. So really looking at what those best practices within the program that you're running. Having sometimes outside evaluations can help. enhancing the credibility of anything that you're doing is going to help move that application, to the top of the list. Having an evaluation plan. Funders want to know that you're not just saying you're going to do something. They are saying that you have a plan to evaluate how well that program is working. Again, the performance indicators, looking at how that measurable impact and collection of data. Every grant funding is going to come with grant reporting. And if you haven't set that up at the outset of how you're going to do that and how you're going to collect the data, what outcomes you want to collect, how you're going to do that when it comes to the reporting, it's going to be incredibly difficult to get them everything you said you were going to do without doing that. So Lisa, there's a question. At what point do you think a formal audit is necessary for a nonprofit? Number of years established in our budget range? Or is it just about the percent of funding received from governmental sources? So, this is an interesting question. So obviously, if you get more than $750,000 in government funding, you have to have a special audit. So that's one piece of it. I think each state has different regulations as well. I want to say in Florida, I think $1 million. If you have revenue of $1 million, you are required to have an audit. And you'd have to look at each state. But I do think depending on the funder, some will require it and you will not be eligible without the audit. I do think if you've been in operation for 3 to 5 years and you have, over $500,000 in revenue, it's a good idea to have an audit. And if the expense and time of that is really a lot, you could also do a compilation. So an auditor can do not the full audit, but there are sort of some steps in there. You could do a compilation, and sometimes those funders who are requesting an audit will take that in lieu of it. So you can look at that. But I would say really if you're raising over $500,000, somewhere between 500 and $1 million, it's a really good idea to have an independent audit. Other questions? All right. Moving on. Crafting a compelling narrative, right? This is outside of the financials, one of the most important things. So what is your why? And I sometimes teach a grant writing class, and we do an exercise, and I ask everyone to write, what is your why? And then I say, pretend you're, for those of you who have kids or anyone who's been around a 4 or 5-year-old, but why? And then again, but why? Right? Really dig deep into the why of what you're doing. So if you are a food pantry, what's your why? To offer people food. But why? So that they're not hungry. But why? Because if they're not hungry, then they can focus on doing other things that can get them out of their current living situation and put them in a place where they can do that themselves, right? So layer that in. What is your real why? This is your chance to tell your story. And so what I suggest for every organization is to really craft this before you're looking at a specific application. Really craft your narrative. Talk about the history of your organization. Talk about the problem that you're addressing and the solution. What you've done in the past that's successful. Write it as long as you need to. Now, for those of you who have years and years of grant experience, some people are going to ask you to write the whole story of your organization in 250 words, and you're going to be like, I have zero idea how to do that. But if you have this sort of standard, I'm going to call it boilerplate, but I don't want anyone to mistake that for being bland and boring. Your narrative should tell your story. I think a lot of times, people want to be very formal and they want to use, jargon, but I think funders want to hear your story in your own words and in the words from the people and the clients that you are serving. So really use this to be able to tell that story with impact, with inflection, with that really that storytelling aspect to it. So once you have that, you can scale that back. You can add to it if you need to. You can use pieces of it to answer certain questions. But if you can write that narrative without it focused on a specific question or a specific answer, you'll be able to take that and utilize it for a lot of different applications and in other ways to talk about the organization, in other ways when you're talking to other donors. Being able to have that piece of it where you're really telling the story is important for any organization to have. So, what we in the nonprofit world do is really boils down to problems and solutions, right? We're trying to create solutions to the problems of society. So when you're looking at what you are writing about, what you are asking for, you want to define the problem, right? The problem should be compelling and substantial. These are big problems that our organizations are working on, and we need to really define that and make that understood within the context of these grant applications. I want to talk about the impact that problem specifically has on the community, how your programs and services are provided, and how those services are going to be the solution to that problem. If you can quantify that problem, especially with data, that's going to make that application that much stronger. And it needs to be broad enough. It's going to justify lots of different programs depending on what you're asking for and what your organization is doing. But really being able to define that specific problem and what it's doing to the community. I can use an example. We work with an organization that is working on LGBTQ problems in a specific area of the country that has a lot of government intervention in that, if you will say. And so instead of just writing and talking about what the problem is, having the data and the metrics to back that up. So people are leaving this part of the country because of this. So that's the problem. The problem isn't just that people have their issues there. It's that people are actually leaving the communities because of it. And so how does the organization come in and solve that problem? But if you don't know that people are leaving the community because of it, how do you know that the solution, what's the solution if you don't have that really substantial problem? So when you're thinking about the work that you're doing, having that data is incredibly important, the data about the problem. And then once you have that, you're defining the solution. What is the work that you're doing? How is that work addressing that problem? How is it addressing it in a different way than anyone else is doing it? How does that set you apart from other organizations that are working in that same type of work? Including, all of the things that you're doing, including measurable outcomes. I think that's the one piece that sometimes trips organizations up, is really looking at how do you measure the results of your programs? This is my favorite. How many people know what the difference between an outcome and an output is? I'm watching the chat. I mean, now it's up on the board, so you are on the screen, so everyone can see what it is. But I think this is an area that really sometimes people struggle with. The output is the actual activity that you're doing. We are serving food to 200 children. We are putting 300 cats and dogs in foster homes, right? That's the output. That's the activity that you're performing. But the outcomes are different. That's what is actually the difference being made. So while you serve 200 kids, what's the outcome of that? Of those 200 kids you served, 100 of them were able to increase their test scores because they had a consistent breakfast every day. Whatever that is, the outcome is what you're really trying to accomplish by doing the activity that you're doing. Mary, haven't really thought about it. So that's, I mean, it's not great to hear, but I'm glad because I hope this is really helpful. A lot of organizations want you to have what they call a logic model, which I think is next. So this is how what you're going to talk about, how you're taking all of the activities you're doing and putting them along the continuum. So I encourage everyone to build a logic model for their organization and or programs. Not every funder asks for them, but more and more are asking. And it is a really great way. It's work. I'm not going to shy away from that, but it's going to really give you a great look at how you're moving your work along and how you're creating those outcomes and your short and long-term impacts. So when someone says, we'd like a logic model, this is what it is. Inputs, activities and outputs, outcomes, and your short and long-term impacts. Most of the time they'll have sometimes you can do it yourself. Sometimes they'll have a template that they want you to use for the logic model, but this is really what the information that needs to go in it. So the inputs are really what resources you're investing. Is it staff? Is it, are you again, to go back to the food model, meals. If you're a therapeutic riding center, it's horses and saddles and food for the horses. So, right, everything that you're investing into the organization to be able to accomplish those activities. Any of your kind of raw materials. And then activities and outputs. Sometimes they're in the same column. If you're looking at a logic model, sometimes they're separated. So just giving you a little bit of a differentiation between them, right? Activities are the specific actions taken, right? So we are serving food, we are having riding lessons, we are placing animals in foster care, all of the activities that your organizations do. We're teaching financial literacy classes. The outputs are those specific actions and taken. So this is the number of services that you're doing. So we have served 200 kids. We have had 200 foster animals in homes. Really, the output is kind of the number of what you're doing. And I know this can be brand new for everyone. So really, if you have questions kind of along the way, please put them in the chat or the question and answer section. I'm really happy to answer those questions for you. So then we move to outcomes. So what is the change in the community because of the program, right? In quantifiable terms, you want to be able, and yes, a lot of what we're talking about are, heady things, but you want to be able to give specific outcomes. So if you're looking at a organization that is a minority business incubator. So minority business incubator has, 42 businesses that go through a learning journey. That's their output. But the outcome could be that 50% of those businesses have grown over the next 2 years. If you're, tracking that data over time. So what's the outcome? What are the changes because of the service that was provided? And then you're looking at impacts, and impacts can be short-term, they can be medium-term, they can be long-term. So back to that minority business incubator, maybe, you know, the short-term impact was that there are, you know, 5% more Black-owned businesses in the city. And the long-term impact is that, you know, you want it to grow to 20% more because of the work that you're doing, because there's now that many more business owners in the community and people are able to see that and more people can go through the program. And the long-term result is really building up that minority business community, right? Alleviating hunger. Is that the long-term effect and impact of the organization? How are you doing that? Goes back to your activities and outputs and your outcomes for your long-term impact. I talked a little bit about this in the beginning, about building the relationships with funders. How many people have actually picked up the phone and called a funder without, you know, that relationship, having the application in front of them and wanting to be able to ask questions? Great. Awesome. I'm watching the chat. So yeah, fantastic. That's not always the case. I think people are hesitant to do that. I think for some small community organizations or small family foundations where you already have a connection and they're already invested in your organization, those can be easy. But sometimes, you know, if you're talking about applying to a huge national foundation, you're talking about Kellogg or Rockefeller or something like that, it can be intimidating. They also could just not get back to you because they have so much. But if you know you fit within their priorities and what that organization is looking to fund, the likelihood that they are going to take that call and be able to build that with you is really good. And once you have that, I know it seems like, you know, people are just reading all of these applications, but if you can get a program officer to really believe in your organization and in your project, the likelihood of that getting funded goes up significantly. I worked for an organization that had a strong relationship with the Rockefeller Foundation, and they completely changed their funding priorities. And we were still able to get $1 million grant from them because of that relationship, even though we didn't clearly fit into where they were shifting their priorities to. So really having those relationships is incredibly important. And I suggest everyone asks for feedback. We all know there are gonna be probably more times than you get them that you're gonna get denied for a grant, but being able to get feedback and asking for that is really important. It's gonna help you learn not only about that organization and what you could do better for next time, but also for your applications to just be better and better as you go forward. So I suggest always, always, always asking for feedback. Again, not everybody will give it, but it's a good practice to just make that part of your habits when you're doing grant writing. All right, understanding the grant landscape. We talked a little bit about this earlier too, but really doing your research. Again, you can look at the 990s of organizations. It will generally tell you where they've given before, reaching out to program officers, really reading through their documentation on their website if they have it, reading the questions in the application, because again, that's going to give you a really great indication of what they're looking for before you spend the time to apply. And this is one of my favorites. Does it cost more to manage the grant than the value of the grant? For those of you who have written, I think sometimes city municipalities have grants where because they're government funded, they require a lot of documentation and reporting, but they're not always huge from a dollar perspective. And sometimes that's worth it. Sometimes getting your foot in the door there is worth it. Sometimes, that $5,000 or $10,000 is going to make all the difference in a program. But if you look at the staff time that it's going to take to manage that grant, to manage the data and the outcomes and the reporting, really looking at kind of the cost benefit analysis of that. Are the chances that you're not going to meet the eligibility requirements? Really look at those. Just like I said earlier, is that grant going to be a stepping stone to something else? Is there, if you do a small CDBG grant with the city, is that going to give you the springboard to show them that you are capable of handling larger grants? And so maybe that's worth that, looking at how that can be a stepping stone to move on. And then, are they renewable year after year? A lot of funders will have limits, so you can get it for 2 years and then you have to take a year off. Or if you get, a large multi-year grant, you have to take that same number of years off. So really thinking about the future, because if you get that large grant once and then you can't replicate that, what is that going to do to the program? So when you're looking at kind of your overall strategy, when you're looking at the calendar and when you're looking at the time frame it's going to take to do all these, really look through all of that, what you're going to be able to do going forward, what it's going to mean for sustainability and for the future when those grants, when you do get those grants, and how do you plan for the future once you're no longer able to have that, once that grant sunsets, or if you can only get that for a year. I know, and I have been in this place many times where you need the funding right now, and sometimes that future planning gets pushed to the back and you'll figure it out the next year. But really, when you put together your overall strategy, you've got to be thinking about that kind of stuff. All right, monitoring and evaluation. I think, again, that's something that that funders are really looking for more and more now. So when you're building the program itself and when you're starting to write the grant, be mindful of what you're going to be able to do to monitor and evaluate. Because once you tell an organization that you're going to do something, you have to report on it. So make sure that they're realistic. Implement that system for how you're going to monitor and report. And sometimes a survey is enough. Sometimes just data on, how many people are coming is enough. But make sure when you write the grant and you're looking at what they're asking for, that you're doing those things that you're going to be able to provide. Regular updates to funders, right? Sometimes they're only asking for something once a year. You've got to report at the end of the year. But I would always suggest somewhere mid-time through the grant, or if you have a newsletter, or if there's been some sort of program celebration, to be able to send that kind of information. Don't just wait for the annual reporting deadline. Create that relationship, send them that information as the program goes along. It's going to show that you're invested with them, that you really want them to see the impacts of that work. Again, collecting data, collecting feedback. You cannot have too much data on the program. And I know your program staff is probably going to be frustrated with some of this, because I've worked in many organizations where that can be a challenge. They're really working hard to actually make those programs run. But in order to grow and in order to really be able to have that grant funding sustainable, you're going to need to have that data. It also allows you to make adjustments. And I think funders are really receptive when you say, hey, we thought this was going to go a certain way. We got feedback. We looked at some of the data and we decided that in order to improve it, we were going to make these changes. Now, if they're huge funding changes or really significant, I would reach out to them ahead of that and just say, is this an appropriate use of funds for this change? But I think if they are in that monitoring and evaluation space, you can really just go in and say, hey, this is what happened. This is why we did it. And most funders are going to really appreciate that you're monitoring that in that way. Right? You're establishing continuous improvement. You're looking at that you're committed to learning, that you don't know everything, that you're providing these programs with the intent of helping your clients and the community, and you're assessing whether that's working or not and adjusting accordingly. They really are going to be receptive to that. All right, some common myths and misconceptions, because I think this is really something that everyone thinks about is, where they fit into the landscape here. So grant readiness is only about financial stability, and it's not. Now, there are going to be some, when you're talking about a federal grant, absolutely. A lot of that is going to be about your financial stability, because you have to front the money. Most government grants are reimbursable, so you actually have to be able to expend that money and that get reimbursed for it. So some of it really is going to be about financial stability, but it's not. And there are organizations that really want to fund capacity building and really want to look at a brand new nonprofit who's doing something innovative and creative in a space and fund that, as long as their mission is strong and clear and they have really great leadership. And then going back to that, like program design, that monitoring, that evaluation. So it's not always necessary. It's back to the earlier question about having, audited financials. It's about being really ready with all of the work that you're going to do. And the same thing with small organizations having no chance of securing grants. They really do. There are a lot of places right now, and depending on what your what sector your organization is working with, that really want to see certain things happen in communities and are really willing to fund those grants that are small. Again, those capacity building grants. Community foundations are an incredible resource for those. They generally want to fund those smaller organizations in a city who are really doing kind of groundbreaking work within the community. And another one, grant readiness is a one-time effort, and that is certainly not true. I'm sure most of the people on this webinar know that you need to regularly assess. You're going to have to change. Your organizations are changing as landscapes change. So you're going to be, you can't just, I did say earlier, write your narrative, but that's going to be something you're going to have to continually update, and it's going to evolve with all of the applications that you're going to do, and you're going to need to be able to adapt to those things. And that the grant application process is straightforward and quick. I think we likely know that the process is long, and you're going to need a lot of input from a lot of people in your organizations. And I think that too often we wait until the last minute, and we certainly have clients that really want something done. You hear about something and the deadline is in 3 days, and you're just not going to be able to put your best foot forward in those. It takes time, it takes planning. So you really got to allocate that time to the process and give yourself the time that you need to get those applications done, and to be able to do them in the way that they're going to have the best likelihood of being funded. And know that it's a competitive process. So we're not going to, each of us is not going to get every grant, or probably even 50% of the grants that we apply for. I think if you are really diligent in looking through the research and understanding what those organizations are looking for, that 50% is probably a really great place to be. If you're getting 50% of your grants, you're doing really well. Again, if you're only applying for one every year and you already know the funder, that's a different thing. But if you're applying for lots and lots of grants every year and you've got about a 50% success rate, you're doing fairly well. Most grants have gotten incredibly competitive, and you have to have that, and you have to have your leadership and your board understand that no grant funding is a guarantee, and even if you've done it before, it's not a guarantee. So having them have that understanding is really, really important as well. So now I know people have asked some questions, but I would love to answer anything anybody else has. Feel free to put that in the chat, in the question and answer panel. If anyone has anything to ask. I'm also going to pop a survey here in the chat as well. Anyone who is willing to do that, we would really appreciate the feedback on that and on this webinar. Here is that link. And I guess if there are no questions, I appreciate. Oh, great. Where is the best place to search for available grants? So there are a few places. Trying to remember what is free. If you really want to build kind of a robust grants program, there is a software called Instrumental, and they'll give you a free 14-day trial, I believe. And it is a great resource to search. You can put in all kinds of parameters and have that. I'm not sure what the monthly cost is after that trial, but if you can get a whole lot of research done in 14 days, you can use their free trial for that. Candid, for those of you who are familiar, and I suggest that all of you that you have a Candid profile. Many organizations do. It's where you can see publicly available 990s and information. You can search individually there for free by funder if you know, but they also have a paid for service where you can search grants. The Chronicle of Philanthropy has free listings where you can look for grants, and they have them posted there as well. Google is your friend too. If you have, you're in a specific sector, you can put that in there, and sometimes that will come up with some organizations that fund that specific area as well. If grant research is something that you're interested in, we also, at SUCUP can do some of that for you. If that's ever something you're interested in, you can feel free to reach out to us as well. Can you download the slides? I will find that out. I will ask yes. I believe that you will I'm getting information from one of my teammates here that you will be able to have those slides. You'll get an email after this, and it'll have those in there. All right. Well, thank you all. Our email will be in those slides as well. And if you ever want to reach out or have any questions, here's our phone number, our website, the email that you can reach out to. I'm happy to answer any questions. If grant writing or research is anything any of you would like to reach out to us to help you with, we are here and always available and have an incredible grants team to be able to do that. And I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon.